We're joined now by Kash Patel. He is the former chief of staff for the Department of Defense and an advisor to President Trump for national security and intelligence. He is on the Trump Force 47 bus tour, currently working its way through North Carolina. Over the next 3 days, they're going to be going to places like Wilmington, Fayetteville, Rocky Mount, Gastonia, Concord, as well as Winston-Salem and Burlington. That is all over the place, not Western North Carolina, Kosh. I'm going to get to that eventually. But what are you seeing on the ground in North Carolina?
Hey, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much for having us on, especially during the tour. What I'm seeing is crowds showing up and Trump 47 volunteers showing up and precinct captains. We're registering voters. We're doing training sessions on voter integrity. We're seeing Americans come up to me and say, we've never really participated in the process, but we're all in for President Trump and we want to do our part. So I'm really seeing a lot of energy everywhere we go, and we've got great folks with us like Governor Tim Reynolds and Hogan Gidley, and Laura Trump's going to be around. So it's going really well, and we're going to keep going as far as we can.
Trump won North Carolina in 2020. I believe it was the closest state that he won. It's considered a battleground in 2024. It's the only state that Trump won in 2020 considered to be a battleground in 2024. What needs to happen for Trump to win North Carolina, in particular, given that many people in Western North Carolina, which is a strong foundational base for Trump, are struggling in the wake of Hurricane Helene?
Yeah, and we'll be out in Western North Carolina next week with the bus tour, but what needs to happen is we have to get our folks out to vote, our folks to register. So if you're in North Carolina, you got one more day to register, and early voting starts next week, and we got to start banking those votes. It's not election day, it's election season, and whether you like it or not, that's what we have to do. We're here to motivate our folks and to remind them that Trump's Force Agenda 47 and Trump's Agenda 47 would have had the folks in Western North Carolina better served after this natural disaster terrorized their communities, would have had them better served when it comes to the border and illegal immigrants coming here. And I'm reminded while I'm in Fayetteville here, just down the street from Fort Bragg, which I know you and I are both very familiar with, that these folks continue to serve, especially turn out some of America's finest in North Carolina. And so what we're doing is just trying to remind them that we are here with them, and we need them to turn out more than ever. As you said, the margins are razor thin, and it's going to come down to one or two counties in this state.
I want to hit you with that part you just said again. Early voting starts next week. I've been hammering, Buck has been hammering, everybody get out, get your votes banked as early as you possibly can. What does it do to help the Trump campaign in these battlegrounds or anywhere else if you get your vote in early?
That's a great question, and people just think, oh, if I wait, it's just as good. No, because once you vote early, your vote is banked, and we see the results in terms of tabulations, and we can direct resources to folks that haven't voted yet, and we can direct our focus on others that are maybe sitting it out, and maybe some of the gun owners in North Carolina. And yes, I'm speaking directly to you. That I'll just give you an example. In Georgia, where I was last week, 150,000 Georgian gun owners did not vote in the last election. And I got to believe the overwhelming majority of those folks want Donald Trump in office and not Kamala Harris to take their guns away. So it gives us space to go out and get to the rest of the community. So if you have the ability to early vote, it is critical because our resources are precious when the donations are coming in, but then we can utilize that for other voters and activate folks that have never participated in the voting process. That's what I'm seeing, and I believe in my heart that that's going to make the difference for Donald Trump in places like North Carolina.
Gosh, what do you think when you see Kamala Harris say there isn't, and I wrote down the quote because I wanted to make sure I have it right, there is not a thing that comes to mind when she is asked what she would have done different than Joe Biden as she tries to run to be her own president here in 2024?
You know what I think, Clay? I think say their names. Say their names. Say Laken Riley. Say the names of the countless Americans who have been murdered and raped across this country, and the drugs that have poured in and killed our children across this country, and say their names to Kamala Harris's face and ask them, how can you possibly say something so disgusting and vile as you wouldn't have done anything differently? You had an opportunity to save American lives. You had an opportunity to keep our streets safe. You had an opportunity to safeguard our children and empower law enforcement. And she's saying she wants another 20 million illegals here. She wants to metastasize that vile hatred form of criminality that they have basically weaponized intentionally. It's not neglect. They made an intentional decision to disregard American safety, and too many families have been crippled by it. And so I just go out everywhere I go, and I try to remind the folks of the people that have been devastated the most, and more is coming if you put her back in office.
You mentioned what happened with the 13 that were murdered by a terrorist in Afghanistan in the midst of our chaotic withdrawal. Also, and it's not getting a ton of attention, but I think it's important you could speak to it. There was just an arrest of one of those Afghan refugees that was not vetted, evidently very well, who was planning a terror attack on Election Day here in the United States. We know that we've let in 13,000 convicted murderers, 16,000 rapists at the southern border, but we also brought a lot of people in from Afghanistan as a part of that chaotic withdrawal. What was your reaction when you saw that one of those individuals was planning a major terror attack?
You know, it's unbelievably disturbing. It reminds me of pre-9/11 days where folks are setting up and staging here. We ran that withdrawal based on intelligence and not political deadlines, and we had a vetting process in place that we handed off to the Biden administration. They chose to ignore. So what happens? A terrorist comes here and plots to kill innocent Americans and maybe even President Trump. That's just the one we know about, Clay. Remember, the DHS Secretary Mayorkas, who's out shopping for sweaters yesterday instead of giving the people of North Carolina relief, allowed these people to come in and basically said, we're not going to check them properly. And that leads to a disastrous situation when they admit to us, Ray and Mayorkas told us under oath in Congress that they are a dozen or 24 known foreign terrorists that they have entered our country, and they lost them. The FBI DHS has lost them. Now, I believe that number to be way higher than just a few dozen when you take in the account of the 12 million plus illegals already here. And they are setting up sleeper cells throughout the country. And I'm glad we caught the one, but Clay, it's just emblematic of the fact that so many folks have not been caught because Harris and Biden have simply chosen to ignore the safety of Americans and jeopardize our communities. And if that's not enough to motivate you to get out and vote for the future of our children and our next generations, I really don't know what is. I'm glad you brought it up. You're right. No one's really talking about it, and it really should be headline news. But, of course, the mainstream media will bury it, and thank God we have great shows like yours with such a big audience to make Americans aware of the catastrophe that is awaiting us if we allow these policies to continue.
Hurricane Milton's going to hit tonight, according to the most recent updates, but Hurricane Helene already has ripped through Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, South Carolina. A lot of people struggling. What are you hearing from people on the ground in North Carolina about FEMA, about the support structure that is existing there? How are North Carolinians talking to y'all as you work through the entire state?
Well, it's really simple. It's not misinformation or disinformation to say the services they need, the safety they need, the food and aid they need are not here. They're not here is a fact that the Biden-Harris administration didn't even show up, and President Trump came the very next day to hand out food aid and water. Now, look, from my time at the Department of Defense, we could have pre-staged the National Guard had we been in charge. We could have pre-staged FEMA and DHS assets on the ground, not just vehicles and helicopters, but also pre-staged life support and water and food and created temporary shelters. They chose not to mobilize those assets. And you don't have to believe me. On FEMA's own website, they have given $500 million to illegal immigrants, and they've given 15 to those in disaster relief. And if that's not enough, the proposal for budget they just sent to the Ukraine for $8 billion and $150 million to Lebanon just this week included natural disaster relief for the Ukraine, not North Carolina, not Georgia, not any of the other states you mentioned. And so it is an intentional failure by this leadership in Harris and Biden to disregard American safety for political purposes and then steamroll it as disinformation. North Carolinians are coming up to me and saying Donald Trump would have staged it, and he's right. We would have staged it with the DOD and every other agency, and we would have fully mobilized the U.S. government to be ready for it and not driving it in or mailing it in by a headline from the New York Times.
Kash, I'm going to let you finish with a challenge to everybody out there. Why should they vote early, 27 days from the election in North Carolina and Georgia and all the different battlegrounds out there?
The reason is the same for every single state. Register and vote early, whether it's my home state of Nevada or any of the states we're talking about, because once you vote, We can shift our resources and our focus to those that haven't voted. Our resources are limited. We are not the Soros machine that prints money and dumps it into every community. We are the machine that puts Americans first. And if you put out your vote, then we can go register even more voters, and we can drive more voters to the booths. And that's on the communities, too. We need you to go find 10 people you don't know, not the folks you know, and get them to vote and remind them what's at stake. It's not just our generation. It's the future generation of this country. And we don't want illegals. We want our kids to have a safe future, a college education, and the American dream that I, an immigrant son of a lawfully immigrated family from a dictatorship in East Africa, am living the American dream thanks to Donald Trump. And that's waiting for everybody if you return him to power. And that's why you got to vote early.
Kash will be in the administration. I think there's a good chance. In the meantime, he's all throughout North Carolina. Kash, appreciate the time. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much. And grab Government Gangsters. Bestseller. You'll love it. Let's take down the deep state together.
We will do that. That's Kash Patel on the road in North Carolina. Look, in today's world where rising crime threatens families and violent crimes is crazy, taking place every 26 seconds on average, how you choose to protect yourself and your family becomes an important decision. And that's why I'm happy to tell you about Saber. Saber pepper projectile launchers. Only 68 caliber launcher with 7 projectiles out there on the market. 40% more than other brands. That's superior home defense. Let me just tell you, we've got guns in the Travis house, but we also got teenagers. And I don't know how many of you out there have teenagers in your house, maybe grandkids, maybe kids, but you don't always know where they're going to be. Sometimes they have curfew. Sometimes they make it. Sometimes they may try to sneak out. If you remember being a teenager, not always listening to mom and dad. Maybe you don't want to risk using a gun if you hear something go bump in the night because you feel fairly safe. But maybe you would like to be able to use something that would deter in the event that you're actually in danger, but not cause someone to have a permanent life-altering issue, like could if you use a firearm. You could use the pepper projectile launcher, and if you use it, it will take care of anybody in the area who is trying to do you harm, but also it's non-lethal, so it will not kill someone. Maybe you don't have the same nervousness about using that. You can have it as a supplement in your home. They also have all sorts of pepper sprays. Right there, you can put on the keychain. And maybe you got a daughter going off to college. Maybe you got kids coming home riding the bus in middle school, high school. I used to have one of these on my keychain back in the day. They've got incredible things to help make your home safer and your family safer. Go check them out at saberradio.com. That's SABRE radio.com. Go look at all of their different offerings. We got them all in the house. You can also call 844-824-SAFE to protect your family today. That's SABRE, saberradio.com. These guys, family owned. You're going to love them. Check them out today, saberradio.com.